Hello, I'm Eleanor Vance, my son. The boy I devoted my entire life to building an empire for left me gasping for air in a sterile hospital room during a heart attack. He chose his conniving, gold-digging girlfriend and a dinner reservation over his own mother's life. They thought I was finished, that my time was up and their new life was just beginning. They were dead wrong. Where are you listening to this from today? A comfortable armchair in your living room? During your commute to work? Settle in, subscribe if you haven't already. And let me tell you the story of how I took back my life from the two people I should have been able to trust the most. The first pang of pain felt like a lie. It was sharp, a jagged shard of glass lodging itself under my breastbone, but I dismissed it. Indigestion. I told myself, a side effect of a 60-hour work week and too much coffee. I was Eleanor Vance, founder and CEO of Vance Designs, a woman who had built a multi-million-dollar interior design empire from nothing but grit and a sketchbook. Women like me didn't have time for indigestion, let alone anything more serious. I was in the middle of reviewing the final schematics for the new Moreau Hotel lobby, a career-defining project. The deep crimson and gold leaf on the page swam before my eyes. A second pang, fiercer this time, radiated up my neck and down my left arm, a hot, terrifying current. My pen slipped from my grasp, leaving a black slash across the blueprints. This was no lie. This was real. My assistant, Maria, found me slumped over my desk, my breathing ragged. Her scream was distant, a sound muffled by the cotton filling my ears. The next few hours were a blur of flashing lights, the wail of a siren that seemed to be coming from inside my own skull, and the cold, impersonal efficiency of paramedics. They spoke in acronyms and clipped phrases, their voices a confusing storm around me. The only anchor in that maelstrom was the thought of my son, James. My James. I had called him from the ambulance, my voice a thready whisper. "I'm on my way, Mom," he'd said, his voice tight with what I mistook for concern. "Don't worry, I'm almost there." When I was finally settled in a private room at St. Michael's Hospital, the starched white sheets felt like a shroud. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was a constant, metallic reminder of my own fragility. James finally arrived, his face pale, his expensive suit looking out of place in the sterile environment. He held my hand, his grip loose, his eyes darting around the room, anywhere but at me. "The doctor said it was a mild one," he said, the words rushing out. "A warning shot, he called it. You just need to rest, Mom. Take it easy for once." I tried to squeeze his hand, to pull him closer, but the effort was immense. The pain had subsided to a dull, heavy ache, but a profound exhaustion had settled deep in my bones. I needed him. In that moment, more than I had ever needed anyone. I needed my son to just sit with me, to be my strength. But then his phone buzzed. He pulled it from his pocket with an almost reflexive speed. His thumb swiped across the screen. I saw the name before he angled it away. Chloe. Of course, Chloe Sterling, his girlfriend of 6 months. A woman who had appeared out of nowhere with a manufactured old money pedigree and the predatory grace of a panther. She was beautiful, I couldn't deny that, with porcelain skin and eyes the color of a stormy sea. But there was a hardness beneath that polished veneer, a calculating chill that I had sensed from our very first meeting. I saw it. But James, my brilliant, loving James, was utterly blind to it, bewitched by her charm. "I have to take this," he muttered. Already walking toward the door, I could hear the tinny whisper of her voice through the receiver. He lowered his own, but the room was quiet, and his words carried back to me, each one a small, sharp betrayal. "No, I can't yet. I know it's important. Chloe, I know, My mother, yes, the dinner, of course. I remember. He came back into the room, his face a mask of conflict. Mom, I'm so sorry. Chloe just reminded me. We have this dinner tonight. It's with a potential investor for her new charity foundation. It's a really big deal for her. Career making. I stared at him, the beeping of the monitor suddenly deafening. A dinner? I whispered, my voice cracking. James, I just had a heart attack. I know. Mom, man, I feel terrible, he said, wringing his hands. It's just... She said it's absolutely critical. We can't reschedule. I'll just go for an hour. Make an appearance. And then I'll be right back. I promise. I'll be back before you even know I'm gone. He leaned down to kiss my forehead, but his lips were cold, his movements rushed. He was already gone, his mind already at a dinner table with her, leaving me behind. I looked at the man I had raised, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose college tuition I had paid with sleepless nights, the son for whom I had built an entire legacy. And I saw a stranger. James, please, I begged, the words catching in my throat. Don't go. He hesitated at the door, his hand on the knob. For a single agonizing moment, I thought he would stay. I saw a flicker of the boy I knew in his eyes. But then his phone buzzed again, a summons from his new queen. The flicker died. I'll be back soon. Mom, he said, his voice hollow. I promise. And then he walked out, leaving me alone with the steady, rhythmic beat of my own breaking heart. The silence James left behind was heavier, more suffocating than any noise. The rhythmic beeping of the monitor was no longer just a sound. It was a clock, ticking away the seconds, minutes, hours of his absence. I watched the fluorescent lights on the ceiling tile blur as tears I didn't have the strength to wipe away pooled in my eyes. The physical pain in my chest was a dull throb, but it was nothing compared to the acute, searing agony of his abandonment. My son, my only child, had chosen a dinner party over his mother's life. The promise he made, "I'll be back soon," echoed in the empty room. A hollow, meaningless string of words. Night bled into the sterile white of the hospital. Nurses came and went, their movements efficient, their voices soft and professional. They checked my vitals, adjusted my IV drip, and offered me sympathetic smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. They were used to seeing people at their most vulnerable, but they couldn't possibly understand the specific nature of my wound. This wasn't just fear of my own mortality. It was the earth-shattering realization that the one person I thought would be my rock was, in fact, the source of the landslide. I tried to sleep, but my mind was a racetrack of memories. James as a boy, building elaborate Lego castles on the living room floor. James at his high school graduation, his face beaming with pride. James, just a few months ago, introducing me to Chloe, his eyes shining with an infatuation so profound it made him seem like a stranger. I must have drifted off at some point, because I was startled awake by a voice just outside my partially open door. It was one of the younger nurses. Her name tag read Sandra. She was on the phone, her voice low and conspiratorial, the kind of hushed tone people use when they think no one is listening. "I'm telling you, Diane," the nurse whispered, "it's just tragic. Old Mr. Henderson in 30B, his nephew has been his caretaker for the last year. The family thought he was a saint." There was a pause. I held my breath, every nerve ending suddenly on high alert. "Well, Mr. Henderson had a stroke last week, and now he's nonverbal. The doctors started looking at his finances to arrange for long-term care, and it's all gone. Every penny. The nephew cleaned out his savings. his retirement, even remortgaged the house. Signed everything over to himself with a power of attorney Henderson apparently signed a few months ago when he was confused. The family is devastated. They said he trusted that boy with his life. The nurse's footsteps receded down the hall, leaving her words hanging in the air like toxic spores. I lay motionless, the blood turning to ice in my veins. Mr. Henderson, a nephew, power of attorney. The words collided in my mind, forming a terrifying, grotesque mosaic. It was a story about someone else, a tragedy down the hall, but it felt like a direct, personal warning, a seed of suspicion, cold and hard, planted itself in the fresh wound of my son's betrayal. I thought back over the last few months. James had been so attentive, unusually so. He'd started asking questions about the business, about financials, about my long-term plans. I had seen it as newfound maturity, a sign he was finally ready to take an interest in the legacy I was building for him. And Chloe, she was always there, smiling, nodding, her eyes gleaming with an intelligence that seemed to miss nothing. There was that one afternoon, about 2 months ago. James had brought over a stack of documents from his financial planner. He said it was just routine estate planning, things I needed to update. "It's to make things easier for you, Mom," he had said, his voice earnest. "Just to ensure everything is streamlined, so you don't have to worry about a thing." I was busy, distracted by a merger proposal. I trusted him. I signed where he told me to sign. My signature, the one that had launched an empire, scrawled carelessly on pages I barely glanced at. One of them, I recalled with a sickening lurch, had been a durable power of attorney, a standard precaution. He had called it, in case of emergency. Like this one. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. The nurse's story was no longer just a story. It was a blueprint. It was a playbook. My son, my James, wouldn't do that. He couldn't. He loved me, but he had walked out of that door. He had left me here, vulnerable and alone, for a dinner party. And as that terrible thought took root, the image of his face as he left, the guilt, the hesitation, the ultimate weak resolve, was suddenly cast in a new, sinister light. Was it the face of a son torn between his mother and his girlfriend? Or was it the face of a co-conspirator, leaving the scene of the crime, hoping his victim wouldn't survive the night? The beeping of the monitor seemed to speed up, a frantic, panicked rhythm that now matched the pounding of my own terrified heart. I was Eleanor Vance. I had built my company by trusting my instincts, by seeing patterns others missed, and my instincts were screaming at me now, a silent, desperate alarm in the quiet of the lonely hospital room. Panic is a paralytic. For a few long, terrifying minutes, I was frozen, trapped in my own body as my mind raced through a horrorscape of possibilities. The nurse's words, James's departure, the forgotten signature on a legal document, it all swirled into a single, cohesive nightmare. They thought I was weak, incapacitated, a problem to be managed and, ultimately, removed. The condescending way Chloe would say, "Oh, Eleanor, you work too hard. You should let James handle more," suddenly sounded less like a suggestion and more like a strategy. Every gesture, every word from the past 6 months was being re-examined in my mind's eye under a harsh, unforgiving light. The flattery, the sudden interest in my business, the carefully orchestrated moments of concern, was it all a performance? A long con? The paralysis broke. It was replaced by something else, something cold and familiar. Rage. This was the same fire that had fueled me when I was a 25-year-old single mother with a sketchbook and a dream, fighting for every contract, every client. It was the anger that had sharpened my senses and hardened my resolve. I was not Mr. Henderson from room 30B. I was Eleanor Vance, and I would not be a victim in my own life story. My hand, trembling slightly, reached for the bedside table. My fingers fumbled for my personal cell phone, the one Maria had had the foresight to pack in my bag. The screen flared to life, a beacon in the dim room. My thumb hovered over James's contact photo, a smiling picture from a happier time. The urge to call him, to scream, to demand answers was overwhelming, but I smothered it. If my suspicions were true, a direct confrontation would be a fool's errand. He would lie. Chloe would have coached him, given him a script. They would gaslight me, call me confused, blame it on the medication or the trauma of the heart attack. No, if I was going to fight this, I needed to be smarter. I needed to move in the shadows, just as they had. My fingers scrolled down my contact list, past business associates and clients, until they found the name I was looking for, David Chen, my lawyer. Not just my corporate attorney, but my friend for over 20 years. David had been with me since the beginning, drafting the contracts for my very first office lease. He was shrewd, relentless, and fiercely loyal. I pressed the call button, holding the phone to my ear. My heart hammered against my ribs with every ring. What if he didn't answer? It was late. Eleanor? David's voice was thick with sleep, but instantly alert. What is it? Are you okay? Maria called me. She told me what happened. I'm alive, David, I whispered, my voice hoarse. But I think I'm in trouble. The kind of trouble you and I are used to dealing with in a boardroom, not a hospital room. I took a deep, shaky breath and laid it all out. I told him about James leaving, about Chloe and her insatiable ambition. I told him about the nurse's overheard conversation and the sudden chilling memory of the power of attorney document. I could feel my voice gaining strength with every word, the fear being burned away by the heat of my anger and resolve. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of him getting out of bed, the rustle of fabric. He wasn't dismissing me. He was listening. Eleanor, he finally said, his voice now crisp and awake. All business. You did the right thing by calling me. Do not call James. Do not let on that you suspect a single thing. Are we clear? Crystal, I replied. Okay. First thing in the morning, I'm filing an immediate injunction to probe the validity of that POA, but that takes time. Right now, I need more. I'm going to engage a private investigator I use for sensitive corporate matters. I want to know everything there is to know about Chloe Sterling, her real name, where she came from, her credit history, her high school yearbook photo, everything. I want to know who she had breakfast with yesterday. Good, I said, a sliver of control returning to me. It felt good to be strategic again, to be on the offensive. There's more, David, my company, my personal accounts. Can they access them with that document? If it's a durable power of attorney, and it's been activated by a doctor's declaration of your incapacitation, yes, he said, and the grimness in his voice sent a fresh chill down my spine. They could begin liquidating assets, transferring funds. They could, in theory, take control of the company. The room felt colder. This wasn't just about my personal wealth. It was about my life's work. Vance Designs was the legacy I was supposed to leave for my son, not the prize he and his girlfriend would steal. What do I do? I asked. For now, you do the hardest thing of all, David said. You rest. You play the part of the weak, recovering mother. Let them think their plan is working perfectly. Don't give them any reason to speed up their timeline or change their strategy. I'll handle the rest. I'll call you as soon as I have anything. We hung up. The room was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. It was no longer empty. It was filled with purpose. I closed my eyes, but I wasn't picturing James's betrayal anymore. I was picturing a chessboard, and I was finally seeing the whole board. My opponent had made their move, thinking my king was undefended. They had no idea the queen was about to cross the entire board to strike back. The hours after my call with David crawled by with agonizing slowness. Every footstep in the hallway, every soft chime of a nurse's pager, made me jump. I was caught in a strange, surreal state of duplicity, forcing my face into a mask of weary repose whenever a nurse entered, while underneath, my mind was a whirlwind of strategy and suspicion. They had moved me to a cardiac step-down unit, a room with more monitors but the same beige walls and oppressive quiet. With the morning light came the hospital routine: blood pressure cuffs, tasteless oatmeal, and a cheerful cardiologist who told me my recovery was textbook. He spoke of stress management and dietary changes, completely oblivious to the real sickness I was battling, a rot that had taken root in my own family. My phone remained silent. No call from James. Not a single text message to ask how I had survived the night. The silence was more damning than any accusation. It confirmed he was not a worried son. He was a conspirator waiting to hear news of his success. The thought was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. Sometime around noon, an idea sparked in my mind, a desperate, long-shot gamble born from years of managing complex projects remotely. My home. It was a smart house, a showcase of the latest technology that I often use to demonstrate possibilities to wealthy clients. Everything was connected: the lights, the thermostat, the sound system, and the security cameras. My fingers, clumsy from anxiety, tapped on the screen of the tablet the hospital provided. I navigated to the app that controlled my home system. My heart hammered as I typed in my password. For a moment, the app refused to load, the spinning icon a symbol of my own powerlessness. Then, it connected. A mosaic of still images appeared on the screen, different angles of my house, the living room, the kitchen, the entryway. All were silent and empty. I felt a pang of foolishness. What did I expect to see? They wouldn't be so stupid as to return to the scene of the crime. They were probably at some celebratory brunch, toasting their success with mimosas paid for with my money. I was about to close the app when my eyes caught the timestamp on the camera feed for my home office. It was from 30 minutes ago. With a trembling finger, I tapped on it. The still image dissolved into a live video feed. The room was empty, just as I'd left it. My desk, with the Moreau Hotel blueprint still spread across it. The black slash from my pen, a stark reminder of when this nightmare began. Disappointment washed over me. I had been wrong. My imagination, fueled by fear and betrayal, was running wild. And then the office door swung open. James and Chloe walked in. My breath caught in my throat. They weren't at brunch. They were in my house, in my most private space. Chloe was wearing a chic, expensive-looking trench coat, and she moved with an air of ownership, her fingers trailing along the mahogany of my bookshelf. James looked haggard, his suit from the night before now rumpled, but he moved with a grim determination. They weren't speaking. There was a tense, businesslike silence between them. They were on a mission. I watched, my body rigid, as James walked directly to the large impressionist painting on the wall behind my desk, a beautiful, calming landscape of the French countryside. It was my favorite. It was also a sham. He lifted it from the wall, revealing the gray steel door of my personal safe. My stomach dropped. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the sides of the tablet to steady myself. Chloe stood beside him, her arms crossed, a small, triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She whispered something to him, And he nodded, his fingers flying across the electronic keypad. He knew the combination. I had given it to him years ago. In case of emergency. A phrase that now seemed like a sick joke. The safe clicked open. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes straining to see. They weren't stuffing their pockets with the emergency cash or the heirloom jewelry I kept inside. Chloe pulled out a pair of latex gloves from her purse and handed a pair to James. Methodically, she began to sift through the stacks of documents within: property deeds, stock certificates, my original birth certificate, my passport, and a thick folio containing the master access codes and ownership documents for Vance Designs. My entire life, my identity, my legacy, all reduced to a stack of papers in the hands of a predator and the son she had turned against me. Chloe handed the folio to James. He took it, his hands shaking almost imperceptibly. He couldn't look at the camera, but I felt his shame, his weakness, radiating through the screen. He was a pawn, a tool, but he was a willing one. He had made his choice. Chloe, on the other hand, looked directly towards the camera's position. She couldn't have known I was watching. Not really. It must have been a coincidence. But in that moment, her cold, stormy eyes seemed to bore right through the screen and into me. Her smirk widened into a full-blown smile, a look of pure, unadulterated victory. It was the look of a hunter standing over her kill. Then, she reached out and gently closed the safe door. The painting was replaced. They gathered the documents, turned off the light, and left, plunging the office and my world into darkness. I was left staring at my own reflection in the black screen of the tablet, the face of a woman who had just witnessed the comprehensive and brutal theft of her entire existence. The image of Chloe's victorious smirk was seared onto the inside of my eyelids. It was a look of such profound contempt and triumph that it eclipsed everything else: the physical pain, the grief, the shock. What was left was a pure, undiluted, and dangerously calm fury. For an hour, I did nothing. I sat upright in my hospital bed, the tablet dark on my lap, and I let that rage solidify. I channeled it. It became a shield, a weapon. The bewildered, heartbroken mother was gone. In her place was the CEO, the strategist, the fighter who had clawed her way to the top and would not be dragged down without a war. My phone rang, startling me from my trance. It was David. I answered before the first ring finished. "Tell me you have something for me," I said, my voice low and steady, devoid of the emotion that had choked me just an hour before. "I have more than something." "Eleanor?" David's voice was grim. "I have a nightmare." I listened as he laid it all out. The private investigator he hired was worth every penny. Chloe Sterling, as we knew her, did not exist. She was a phantom. Her real name, the investigator believed, was Catherine O'Malley. There was no old money family from Greenwich. She was from a forgotten town in rural Pennsylvania. Her father was a mechanic, her mother a checkout clerk. Catherine O'Malley had a juvenile record for petty theft and fraud. At 18, she vanished. "She's a professional," David continued, his words sharp and precise. The PI found a pattern, faint traces of her in 3 other states. Different names, different backstories, but the same M.O. She targets wealthy, single-parent families. She finds a weak point, a lonely son, a vulnerable daughter, and she integrates herself. She's a social chameleon, a parasite. In one case, from Arizona, a retired tech mogul ended up losing his entire fortune to a charity foundation run by a woman matching her description. By the time he realized what was happening, the money was gone, washed through a dozen offshore accounts, and she had vanished. I closed my eyes, picturing Chloe in my living room, admiring my art, complimenting my success, all while seeing me as nothing more than a mark, a fat, juicy target. "The dinner last night," I said, my voice like ice. "It wasn't just a dinner." "No," David confirmed. "It was the closing. The investor she was meeting was a man named Marcus Thorne. He's not an investor. He's a disbarred attorney from Florida who specializes in creating shell corporations and complex offshore financial structures. The PI is certain they were there to execute the power of attorney. They would have used it to establish Thorne as a co-signer on your accounts and a proxy on the board of Vance Designs. They were creating the legal framework to systematically strip you of everything you own." It all clicked into place. Their plan was audacious and horrifyingly brilliant. They weren't just grabbing cash and jewels. They were staging a complete corporate and financial coup. The documents they took from the safe were the final pieces they needed, the original proofs of ownership, the master access codes that would allow them to bypass normal security protocols. They assumed I would either not survive the heart attack or that I would be so weakened, so sedated and confused in my recovery, that by the time I understood what was happening, it would be too late. They would be in complete control. "They think they've already won," I said, my mind racing ahead, formulating a counter-strategy. The footage from my security camera. It was my word against theirs, but the video was irrefutable proof of their intent. "David, they were here. In my house. About an hour ago." I quickly explained what I had witnessed on the security camera feed. I described the gloves, the safe, the documents they took. I described the look on Chloe's, on Catherine's face. "I have it recorded." I finished. It saved to the cloud. For the first time, I heard something other than grim professionalism in David's voice. It was a spark of savage excitement. "Eleanor, that's it," he said. "That's everything. Conspiracy to commit fraud, theft. With her record, she's going away for a long, long time. James, he's in deep. Eleanor, he's an active participant." A pang, the last echo of a mother's instinct, went through me. My son, my foolish, blind, weak son. He had thrown his life away for a fantasy, for a woman who saw him as nothing more than a key to a vault. But the pang was fleeting. He had made his bed. He had held the door open for the wolf, and he had helped her gather the tools to butcher his own mother. Pity was a luxury I could no longer afford. "What's our next move?" I asked David, my voice cold and clear as a winter morning. "Our next move," he replied, "is to let them walk right into the fire they started. We're not just going to stop them, Eleanor. We are going to dismantle them." The endgame had begun. They thought they were holding all the cards, unaware that I was about to burn the whole deck. The conversation with David flipped a switch in my mind. The fog of grief and betrayal evaporated, replaced by the crystal-clear, cold logic of a CEO in crisis mode. My hospital room, once a symbol of my vulnerability, transformed into a war room. The flimsy gown felt like armor. The IV stand was my command post. I was no longer Eleanor Vance, the patient. I was Eleanor Vance, the commander-in-chief of my own life, and I was launching a full-scale counter-offensive. "First things first, David," I said, my voice low and urgent, my mind already mapping out a flowchart of actions. "The money. We have to cut off the money, every single account." "I'm already on it," he said, "but with the POA, they could still argue in court, tie things up for weeks." "Not if the account holder reports fraudulent activity," I countered, my brain firing on all cylinders. "They are anticipating a grieving son taking control for his incapacitated mother. They are not anticipating his mother calling the fraud department from her hospital bed." While David began contacting the legal departments of my various financial institutions, I started with the personal accounts. I called the private client hotline for my primary bank, a number reserved for their highest net worth individuals. A deferential voice answered, "Ms. Vance, we were so sorry to hear about your health. Your son, James, was in contact with us this morning." My blood ran cold. "He was?" I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral, slightly weak. "Yes. He was initiating the transfer of authority based on a power of attorney. Mr. Thorne was CC'd on the correspondence. We were just waiting for the final paperwork to process." They were that close. Hours, maybe minutes away from gaining control. "There's a problem," I said, letting a note of alarm creep into my voice. "My tablet, I think it was hacked. I'm seeing unauthorized transfer alerts. I need a lockdown, an immediate, total freeze. All accounts, personal, investment, trust funds, everything. Code red. No funds in or out. Not by me, not by my son, not by God himself, until you hear my voice, in person, in your office. Do you understand?" The banker's tone shifted from solicitous to alarmed. The words hacked and fraud have a magical effect on financial institutions. There was a flurry of typing. "Yes, Miss Vance. Understood. I've placed a temporary verbal lockdown on all assets associated with your name. Nothing will move." One down. Next was Vance Designs. This was more complex. It wasn't just money, it was an operational entity. A living, breathing company with payroll, vendors, and contractual obligations. I couldn't just freeze it. I needed to secure it. I called my chief financial officer, a brilliant, no-nonsense woman named Linda, who had been with me for 15 years. I trusted her implicitly. "Linda, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I'm invoking an emergency protocol," I began. I gave her a sanitized version of the story, a security threat, a compromised POA, a hostile takeover attempt. I didn't name my son. I couldn't. Not yet. It was a weakness I wasn't ready to expose. But I told her enough. "I need you to temporarily suspend all executive-level financial authority, except your own. Any transfer over $5,000 requires a verbal confirmation code from me, and only me. The code is Moreau 1871, the year of the Paris Commune. Effective immediately." Linda didn't ask questions. She was a soldier. "Understood. Eleanor. Consider the corporate treasury locked down. Get well. We need you back." Finally, I called David back. "The assets are frozen." I told him. "Good," he said. "Now for the trap." "The police are on board. I sent them the security footage and the PI's file on Catherine O'Malley. Chloe. They have enough to move forward. They're treating it as a high-level fraud and conspiracy case. They want to catch them red-handed." "What's the plan?" I asked. "The plan is you're going to call your son," David explained. "You're going to sound weak, a little confused. You're going to tell him you're worried about the business, about the finances, and you need him to bring those papers you signed a few months ago to the hospital so you can review them with him. Tell him you want to make sure he's protected, that he can take care of things while you recover." It was a brilliant, cruel piece of psychological bait. It would play directly into their narrative. The weak, confused mother, worried but not suspicious. It would make them feel secure, powerful, and it would bring them back here, to my room, with the very documents they had stolen, the proof of their conspiracy, in their hands. "They'll walk right in," I whispered, marveling at the poetic justice of it. "And when they do?" "When they do," David said, his voice hard as steel. A detective and 2 uniformed officers who will be waiting in the room next door will come in and join the conversation. It's over. Eleanor, all you have to do now is make one last phone call. You have to be an actor. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of my phone. The woman looking back was pale, tired, hooked up to wires and tubes, but her eyes were flinty, sharp. The performance of a lifetime. I could do that. For my company. For my life. For the justice I was about to serve. I could do that. I took a deep breath, found James's number, and pressed the button to call my son. Making that call to James was one of the hardest things I have ever had to do. My hand was shaking so badly I had to steady it with the other. Every instinct screamed at me to unleash the torrent of fury and pain I was holding back. But David was right. I had to be an actor. I had to play the part of the frail, befuddled mother they believed me to be. When he answered, his voice was a carefully modulated blend of concern and impatience. "Mom, is everything okay? I was just about to call you." A lie. A smooth, practiced lie. "James, darling," I began, pitching my voice to be soft, breathy, and laced with a hint of medication-induced confusion. "I'm sorry to bother you. The doctors, they're saying I'll need to be here for a while. A few weeks, maybe." I let that hang in the air. "Oh, Mom, that's terrible," he said, the false sympathy barely concealing the flicker of triumph I could imagine in his eyes. This was good news for them. More time. "I've just been lying here thinking," I continued, letting my voice trail off. "Worrying. About the business, the bills, everything. You know I'm not good at letting go. Don't you worry about a thing. Mom," he said, jumping in exactly as I'd hoped. "I've got it all under control. Chloe and I are taking care of everything." "I know, dear. You're such a good son," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "It's just to put my mind at ease. Do you remember those papers I signed a couple of months ago? The ones your financial planner suggested? For an emergency?" "Yes, of course," he said, a new note of caution in his voice. "The power of attorney. That's it," I said, feigning relief. Could you bring them to me? I just want to look them over, with you here, so you can explain them to me again. My head is just so fuzzy. I want to make sure you have everything you need to take care of things properly." There was a pause. I could hear him covering the receiver, the muffled sound of him whispering to Chloe. He was checking with his handler. The silence stretched for a full 10 seconds, an eternity in which my entire plan hung in the balance. Then he came back on the line, his voice smooth as silk once more. "Of course, Mom. Anything to make you feel better. We have some errands to run, but we can be there in a couple of hours. We'll bring the whole file." "Oh, thank you, James," I whispered. "That will make me feel so much better. I'll see you soon." I hung up the phone and fell back against the pillows, a single-eyed cold tear tracing a path down my temple. I had done it. The bait was set. The trap was ready to spring. Within the hour, the room began to change. First, David arrived, his face set and serious. He wasn't my friend anymore. He was my general. He carried a leather briefcase, which he placed on the chair in the corner. Then, 2 other men arrived. One was a broad-shouldered man in a rumpled suit who introduced himself as Detective Miller. His eyes were sharp and missed nothing. The other was a younger, uniformed officer who remained quiet and watchful. "Ms. Vance," Detective Miller said, his voice a low rumble. "Your lawyer has briefed me. I've reviewed the evidence. The security footage is damning. The file on this woman is thick. You're doing a brave thing." He explained the procedure. He and the officer would wait in the small, adjoined bathroom, leaving the door slightly ajar. David would sit in the armchair in the corner, playing the part of the concerned family lawyer who had just happened to stop by. My job was simple: get them in the room, get them to produce the documents, and get them to admit, on tape, what their intentions were. Detective Miller discreetly placed a small digital recorder on my bedside table, partially hidden behind a box of tissues. "Just talk to them, Ms. Vance," he said. "We'll handle the rest. David." Detective Miller. And the officer disappeared into the bathroom, pulling the door until only a black sliver of shadow remained. Suddenly, the room was quiet again, but it was a heavy, charged silence, humming with anticipation. I smoothed the thin hospital blanket over my legs. I took a sip of water. I composed my face into the same mask of weary vulnerability I had perfected for the phone call. I looked every bit the part of the sick, helpless mother, waiting for her loving son. I was a spider, sitting motionless in the center of a newly spun web, waiting for the telltale vibrations of the fly's approach. And I didn't have to wait long. About an hour later, there was a soft knock on the door, and the handle began to turn. The door swung open, and they walked in. A portrait of feigned concern. Chloe was first, holding a ridiculously oversized bouquet of lilies, their cloying, funereal scent filling the room. She was dressed impeccably in a cream-colored cashmere sweater and tailored slacks, looking more like she was attending a gallery opening than visiting a cardiac patient. James trailed behind her, holding a sleek leather document portfolio. He looked tired. The skin under his eyes was bruised with shadow, but he managed a weak smile for me. Their entrance was a performance, and I was their sole audience member. "Eleanor, darling," Chloe cooed, gliding to my bedside. She placed the lilies on my nightstand with a flourish. "We were so worried. We came as soon as we could. You look a little better, though, a little color in your cheeks." She reached out to touch my arm, and I had to use every ounce of self-control not to recoil. Her touch felt like a spider's, light and predatory. "James," I said, my voice soft, ignoring Chloe and looking only at my son. "Thank you for coming, and thank you for bringing the papers." James flinched slightly when he saw David sitting quietly in the corner. "David," he said, his voice tight, "I didn't know you'd be here." "James," David replied with a calm, even nod. "Your mother called me. She was worried about some financial matters and wanted me here to help clarify things. Standard procedure." That seemed to satisfy him. It fit their narrative. Of course, the confused old mother would call her lawyer. It was a sign of her weakness, not her strength. Chloe's eyes, however, narrowed for a fraction of a second as she assessed David, a flicker of calculation in their depths. She saw him not as a helper, but as a potential obstacle to be managed. "Well, it's a good thing you're here, then," Chloe said, her smile bright and artificial. "We can all get on the same page and make sure Eleanor has absolutely nothing to worry about." She perched on the edge of the visitor's chair, a queen holding court. "James, why don't you show your mother the documents? We can walk her through them again. Put her mind at ease." James opened the leather portfolio on the small table over my bed. He took out a thick stack of papers, bound in a neat folder. On top, I could see the bold heading, "Durable Power of Attorney," my death warrant, delivered with a smile. "See, Mom," James began, his finger tracing the lines of text. "It's all right here. This just gives me the ability to handle the day-to-day for you while you're recovering, paying bills, managing the staff, making sure the company runs smoothly. It's so you can just focus on getting better. His explanation was so simple, so reasonable. If I didn't know the truth, I might have been moved by his apparent thoughtfulness, but I did know the truth. I knew that managing the company meant selling it off piece by piece to shell corporations controlled by Marcus Thorne. I knew paying bills meant funneling my life savings into offshore accounts under the name Catherine O'Malley. And it gives you full control? I asked, playing my part, my voice trembling ever so slightly. If I'm unable to make decisions for myself? Chloe jumped in, her voice dripping with syrupy reassurance. It's just a formality, Eleanor, a precaution. In the worst-case scenario, it ensures your legacy is protected by the person who cares about it most, your son. Her eyes met mine, and in them, I saw it again. That cold, triumphant gleam. She truly believed she had won. She was savoring this moment, the final act of my humiliation, where I myself would bless her theft. She thought she was talking to a fool, a broken-down old woman. She had no idea she was talking to her executioner. I looked from her smug face to my son's conflicted one. He wouldn't meet my gaze, focusing intently on the papers as if they held the answers to the universe. He knew, on some level, that this was wrong. But he was too weak, too ensnared, to stop it. So, with this document, I said, my voice growing clearer, stronger, you and Chloe could, for example, sell my house. James looked up, startled by my change in tone. Well, technically, I suppose, but we would never... Or liquidate my stock portfolio, I continued, my eyes locked on his. Or replace the board of my company? Chloe's smile tightened at the edges. Eleanor, you're getting yourself worked up. This is all just legal language. Is it? I asked, letting the question hang in the air. Because it sounds an awful lot like a hostile takeover. And I have to say, for a concerned son and his girlfriend, you both went to an awful lot of trouble, didn't you? Right down to the latex gloves you wore when you broke into my safe this morning. The blood drained from James's face. He looked as if I had physically struck him. Chloe's mask of serene confidence didn't just crack. It shattered into a million pieces, revealing the vicious, cornered animal underneath. Her face contorted with rage. You have no idea what you're talking about, she hissed. You're confused. You're on medication. Am I? I said, my voice now as cold and hard as a diamond, because I feel remarkably clear. In fact, I don't think I've seen things this clearly in my entire life. I held up my hand, a silent signal. I think, I said, my eyes boring into them, that this performance is over. The moment the words, "the performance is over," left my lips, the bathroom door swung open with a decisive bang. Detective Miller stepped out, followed by the uniformed officer. The small hospital room suddenly felt crowded, the air thick with a tension so palpable it was hard to breathe. The transformation on James's and Chloe's faces was instantaneous and profound. James recoiled as if he'd been tasered, his face a mask of utter, uncomprehending shock. He stumbled backward, knocking into an IV stand, which wobbled precariously. All the blood had drained from his face, leaving him with the pallid, waxen look of a corpse. He stared at the police officers, then at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, but no sound came out. Chloe, however, reacted differently. For a split second, there was pure, undiluted terror in her eyes. The mask was gone, and I saw the real Catherine O'Malley, a cheap grifter from a dead-end town, panicked and cornered. But just as quickly, that terror was replaced by a snarl of pure fury. Her survival instincts, honed over years of deception, took over. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, her voice shrill and ugly. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "She's delirious. She's had a cardiac event. She's on powerful medication. She's paranoid. You can't listen to a word she says." Detective Miller ignored her completely. He walked calmly over to the overbed table and picked up the portfolio of documents. "Durable power of attorney," he read aloud, his voice flat. He then looked at Chloe. "Catherine O'Malley, I presume." The use of her real name hit her like a physical blow. She staggered back, her face a mess of disbelief and rage. "My name is Chloe Sterling." "We have a file that says otherwise," Miller said calmly, "a very thick one. It seems you have a habit of helping wealthy families. We also have security footage from this morning, showing you and Mr. Vance here looting a private safe, and we have this." He gestured to the small digital recorder on my nightstand. "A lovely recording of you attempting to coerce a vulnerable patient into signing over her assets." David stood up from his chair, no longer a passive observer. He stepped forward, holding a sheaf of his own papers. "And for the record," he said, his voice ringing with authority, "while you were running your errands, Ms. Vance was busy. Every single one of her assets has been frozen. Every account is locked down. The power of attorney you hold in your hands," he gestured to the papers Miller was holding, "is worthless. It has been legally and irrevocably voided." That was the final blow. The knowledge that she had failed, that all her scheming had been for nothing, broke her. The fight went out of her, replaced by a desperate, spitting venom. "It was him!" she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at James, who was now leaning against the wall, looking like he was about to be sick. "It was all his idea. He hates you. He told me you were a controlling monster, that you never thought he was good enough. He wanted your money. He wanted to be free of you. I was just helping him." The betrayal was so brazen, so complete, that it was almost artistic. She would burn everyone and everything around her to create a diversion for her own escape. But it was too late. The uniformed officer stepped forward. "Catherine O'Malley," he said, his voice official and devoid of emotion. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, grand theft, and attempted elder abuse." The officer pulled out a pair of handcuffs. The metallic click as he secured her wrists was the loudest sound I had ever heard. Chloe didn't fight. She went limp, a venomous tirade of curses and threats pouring from her lips, directed at me, at James, at the police, at the world. As the officer led her out of the room, her shrill voice echoing down the hallway, all eyes turned to James. He was a wreck, a hollowed-out shell of a man. He slid down the wall until he was crumpled on the floor, his head in his hands, his body racked with deep, gut-wrenching sobs. He had been played. Yes, he had been manipulated by a master, but he had also been a willing participant. He had made his choices. He had walked out that door when I begged him to stay. He had opened that safe. His hands were just as dirty as hers. Detective Miller looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am, what do you want to do about him?" The question hung in the air, heavy and terrible. My son, my broken, foolish, treacherous son, was on the floor, his fate resting entirely in my hands. The room was suddenly intensely quiet, save for the sound of James's ragged sobs. Chloe's screeching voice had faded down the hall, leaving a vacuum filled with the wreckage of our lives. Detective Miller's question, "What do you want to do about him?" was not just a legal query. It was a moral one. It was the question every mother dreads. Where does love end and justice begin? I looked at the crumpled figure on the floor. This was the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the teenager I had nursed through the flu, the young man whose college graduation photo sat on my desk, and he was also the man who had left me to die, the accomplice to a plot to steal everything I had ever built. The two images warred in my mind, an impossible contradiction. Part of me, a deep, primal, maternal part, wanted to rush to him, to hold him, to tell him it would be all right. But that part of me had been grievously wounded. It was overshadowed by the cold, clear-eyed CEO who knew that a cancer, left untreated, would destroy the entire organism. To forgive him now, to shield him from the consequences of his actions, would not be an act of love. It would be an act of enablement, the final, fatal mistake in a long line of them. I had given him too much, too easily. For his entire life, I had built him a gilded cage, and he had become so weak he couldn't even recognize the predator who had come to devour him. My love had become his poison. "He will not be shielded," I said, my voice quiet but firm, resonating with a finality that surprised even myself. I looked at Detective Miller. "He will cooperate fully with your investigation. He will tell you everything he knows about Catherine O'Malley and her associates. He will face the legal consequences of his complicity." James's head snapped up, his face streaked with tears and disbelief. "Mom, no," he pleaded, his voice a hoarse whisper. "I'm sorry, I was stupid. I loved her, and she twisted everything. Please, Mom, don't do this." I met his gaze, and for the first time, I didn't see my little boy. I saw a man I didn't know, a man who had made a catastrophic moral failure. "Love is not an excuse for betrayal, James," I said, my voice devoid of anger, filled only with a profound, weary sadness. "She may have lit the match, but you held the torch. You made choices. You walked out of this room. You opened that safe. Those were your actions, and you will own them." I turned to David. "He will need his own lawyer, not you. Someone else." Then I looked back at James, delivering my final verdict. "When the legal process is over, whatever the outcome, my offer is this. If you truly want to find your way back, if you want to earn a single shred of my respect, you will start at the bottom. You will work for Vance Designs, but not in an office. You'll start in the warehouse. You'll pack boxes. You'll sweep floors, and you'll earn minimum wage. You will learn the value of the things you were so willing to throw away. You will learn what it means to build something, instead of just taking it." He stared at me, his eyes wide with horror. This was a fate worse than prison to him. The humiliation, the fall from grace. It was the only path I could see. Not a path to forgiveness. That was a distant, perhaps unreachable, shore. But it was a path to redemption. The choice was his. Detective Miller gave a slow, respectful nod. He helped a stunned, shattered James to his feet and led him out of the room, not in handcuffs, but as a cooperating witness who was, for all intents and purposes, under arrest. David came to my bedside. "Eleanor," he said softly, "that was the hardest thing I've ever seen anyone do." "No," I said, looking at the empty doorway where my son had just stood. "The hardest thing will be learning to live with it." The beeping of the heart monitor, which had been the soundtrack to my nightmare, now seemed like a steady, resolute drumbeat, the beat of a heart that was damaged, but not broken, a heart that had survived. The silence in the aftermath is a strange thing. It's not peaceful. It's the quiet of a battlefield after the fighting has stopped, heavy with the ghosts of what was lost. My son avoided prison time by testifying against Catherine and her network, leading to a much larger federal investigation that brought down Marcus Thorne and 2 others. He took my offer. Some days, when I'm leaving the office late, I see him in the warehouse, his face smudged with dirt. his designer clothes replaced with a simple work uniform. We don't speak. There are no words yet that can bridge the chasm between us. Sometimes I see a flicker of his old self, but mostly I see a man humbled, broken, and slowly, arduously, learning the cost of his choices. My heart healed, physically at least. The doctors call my recovery remarkable, but there are scars there that no surgeon can see. Betrayal from an enemy is a wound, but betrayal from your own child is an amputation. You survive, but you are never whole again. I've thrown myself back into my work, into the clean lines and solid structures of design, finding solace in creating order out of chaos. I won the Moreau Hotel contract, and it's being hailed as the masterpiece of my career. I am successful, I am respected, I am strong, but at night, in the quiet of my big, empty house, the silence sometimes feels deafening. Justice was served, but it brought no joy. I took back my life, but I lost my son in the process. Perhaps, in the end, that was the price. Have you ever had to make a choice that was both right and devastatingly painful? What does true redemption look like? And is it always possible? I'd be interested to read your thoughts in the comments below.